China has summoned the Japanese ambassador over comments made by his prime minister on Taiwan. Sanae Takaichi says an armed attack on the island would be a survival-threatening situation that would prompt a military response from Tokyo.
The Bank of Japan, they're keeping their rates steady. They're leading the yen to tumble even further. So how much longer can Japan take the hit from this weakening yen?
Consumers in Japan are fearful of loosening their purse strings. A stubbornly weak currency has hoisted the price of imported food and energy. And despite government pressure, businesses are reluctant to boost wages.
Well, speaking of trade shocks, Japan is feeling the pressure on factory floors. The country's manufacturing sector just logged its fastest contraction in 19 months, with the PMI dropping to 48.3.
Japan's factories might be turning the corner. Figures out Monday showed activity still shrinking, but at a slower pace.
Japan is the fourth largest economy on Earth, worth over $4.28 trillion. From the outside, everything seems normal, stable, predictable. But beneath the surface, something frightening is happening, quietly, rapidly, and in a direction that should concern every major power. And what makes it so alarming is that it isn't driven by a single crisis, but four slow-burning forces converging at the same time. And the first, the one Japan cannot outrun, is demographics. Right now, 29.3% of Japan's population is over 65. That's not a retirement wave, that's a demographic avalanche. No major economy has ever aged this fast, and with every year that passes, the problem gets worse. Think about this. Back in 1980, there were 7.4 workers for every retiree. By 2030, that ratio collapses to 1.8 to 1. That means fewer people paying taxes, fewer people consuming, more pressure on pensions, and an economy trying to sprint while carrying a backpack filled with bricks. And those bricks aren't just heavy, they're expensive. Because this aging curve leads directly into Japan's second crisis, the labor shortage. Japan's working age population, ages 15 to 64, has shrunk from 87 million in the 1990s to just 74 million today. Entire sectors are being squeezed dry. Factories that once operated at full capacity now can't find enough workers to keep a single shift running. Restaurants can't hire. Construction companies are turning down projects. Hospitals are understaffed. This is no longer a future problem. It's costing Japan $104 billion every year in lost opportunities. That's 2.6% of the entire economy disappearing, not because companies don't have demand, but because they don't have people. From January to August 2025, 237 companies went bankrupt simply because they couldn't find employees. That's a 22% jump in 1 year. And those bankruptcies are just the surface-level damage. Fewer workers mean fewer taxpayers. More retirees mean soaring social costs. And when those two forces collide, Japan is pushed into one direction, deeper into debt, the third force pulling Japan into uncharted territory. Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio has become the largest in the industrialized world, now sitting at 230%. That's nearly $9.8 trillion. To put that into perspective, if you combined the national debts of Germany, Canada, and Italy, you still wouldn't reach Japan's level. For decades, Japan survived this because of one advantage. Almost 88% of its debt is held domestically, by its own banks, insurance companies, and the Bank of Japan. This made borrowing cheap, safe, and controlled. But that control is fading. Inflation has been rising, even after cooling from 3.7% in May 2025 to 3% in October. And the Bank of Japan has been forced to slowly tighten policy. Interest rate hikes that were once unthinkable are now back on the table. And every small increase makes the debt more expensive, pushing Japan closer to a financial pressure point. Still, as heavy as these first three pressures are, Japan's most frightening challenge isn't internal at all. It's what's happening just beyond its borders. Because Japan is now facing one of the most intense geopolitical environments since the end of World War II. And that story starts with China. China has been expanding its military presence across the East China Sea, pushing deeper into waters Japan considers its own. The two countries clash regularly around the Senkaku Islands, a small chain of uninhabited rocks that have become one of Asia's most dangerous flashpoints. But this tension isn't just about islands, it's about Taiwan. For Japan, Taiwan is not a distant political issue. It's a lifeline. Nearly all of Japan's maritime trade passes through the Taiwan Strait. If Taiwan were to fall or come under Chinese control, Japan's supply lines could be squeezed, monitored, or blocked entirely. and a country that imports almost all of its energy can't afford even a moment of disruption. This is why Japanese leaders have been sounding the alarm. And the Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi, has taken an unusually tough stance, warning that Japan could not remain silent if China made a move on Taiwan. China responded instantly, calling Japan's position hostile and threatening economic retaliation, and even talk of delivering a crushing defeat. Whenever a major power uses language like that, it's not just bluster, it's a signal. And Japan heard it. Quietly and without much global attention, Japan has begun rewriting decades of military restraint. A country bound by a pacifist constitution is now increasing defense spending to the highest levels in its modern history. It's buying long-range missiles, rebuilding its navy, and aligning more closely with the United States than at any time in the past 20 years. All of this is happening while Japan's economy is slowing down again. In the third quarter of 2025, Japan's GDP contracted 1.8% on an annualized basis, its first decline in 6 quarters. Exports fell 4.5%. Hammered by U.S. tariffs on Japanese goods, especially cars. Even though a new trade deal softened some of those tariffs, the damage has already been done. Meanwhile, the yen has fallen to a 9-month low. That weak currency makes Japanese exports cheaper, great for companies, but it also makes essential imports more expensive. For a country that buys most of its energy and raw materials from abroad, that's a dangerous trade-off. A weak yen boosts tourism and the stock market, but it quietly suffocates households and hides deeper structural weaknesses. And remember that labor shortage we talked about earlier? It intersects with everything. It pushes wages up, which sounds good, until you realize prices have been rising faster. A classic wage price spiral. It forces companies to automate faster, which Japan excels at. But no amount of robots can replace a missing population. And as firms struggle to find workers, economic output shrinks, reducing tax revenue and making that enormous national debt even harder to carry. This is the part where most countries would rely on immigration to stabilize the population. But Japan, culturally, politically, and historically, has never embraced large-scale immigration. Change is happening slowly, but nowhere near fast enough to compensate for the demographic collapse. So now Japan is experiencing something almost no modern nation has ever faced: shrinking population, shrinking workforce, rising debt, rising geopolitical threats, and an economy that still ranks as one of the largest in the world. That combination is rare and dangerous. But here's the twist: Japan is not collapsing. In fact, it's doing something far more interesting and far more unpredictable. Instead of fighting these problems in the usual ways, Japan is innovating its way through them. This is the part of the story that rarely gets attention, but it matters. Japan is doubling down on robotics, not as a trend, but as a survival strategy. It's pushing into hydrogen energy, a field where Japan wants to lead the world. It continues to dominate advanced manufacturing and high-precision engineering. These are not industries that disappear easily. They're built on decades of experience, patents, and expertise. And despite the problems, Japan remains remarkably wealthy, organized, and technologically capable. But will that be enough? Can innovation outrun a shrinking workforce? Can domestic investors continue absorbing limitless debt? Can Japan hold off China while dealing with the most intense demographic shift ever recorded? Can an export-dependent economy thrive when the pillars that support it, trade, currency stability, global security, are all being tested at once? These are the questions no one can answer yet. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes Japan's situation so unsettling. Because what's happening right now isn't loud. It's not dramatic in the way breaking news usually is. It's slow, creeping, structural. And that's the kind of danger that catches nations off guard. Japan has always been the quiet powerhouse of Asia. Disciplined, efficient, reliable. But even the strongest structures weaken from within if the pressure is constant and unrelenting. And right now, all 4 of Japan's long-term pressures, demographics, debt, labor shortages, and geopolitical risks, are accelerating at the same time. This isn't a storm Japan can simply wait out. It's a transformation. And the rest of the world is watching closely, because Japan's future won't just shape Asia, it will reshape global power. But there's one last question, the biggest one of all. Is Japan the warning sign or the preview? Because in a world where birth rates are falling, debt is rising, labor shortages are spreading, and geopolitical risks are heating up, what Japan is facing today might not be unique. It might be the future, for everyone. Something frightening is happening in Japan, but the truly terrifying part is what it might mean for the rest of the world. If you got value from this video, make sure to like and subscribe. And don't stop here. Click the video on your screen for another deep dive into economics. See you there.